Welcome to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. This podcast is all about conversations about healing and rising from the ashes of your grief and trauma. In this podcast, we will be deconstructing and highlighting the different aspects of grief and loss. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Zampitella. But loss of pets, especially with people who have trauma, people who grew up in environments in which they were abused or ignored and neglected. Well, sometimes the pet that they have in their adult life is the safest relationship they've ever had, and it is a relationship. So we don't want to underestimate or disenfranchise the loss of a pet. All right. How would an organization show compassion to employers or students? People are often hurried back and the loss is often not talked about. I have a friend that this happened to, and a student died by suicide, and the organization, the school, absolutely shut everybody down from talking about it. Not only was my friend absolutely impacted by this, but the girls' friend group was coming to my friend, and they would, congregate into her classroom because nobody talked about it. And when she went to the principal to say, hey, we need to do something, the principal said, we just got to pick up and go. We just got to get back on track and get life going as normal, completely shutting everybody down. She was pissed to the highest of pistivity, and I would have been pissed that much too. I'm pissed for her. Organizations have got to be able to acknowledge a loss. Organizations have absolutely got to be able to open up a dialogue and say, look, we know that there has been a loss. We'll keep going with this young lady. We know that there's been a loss to suicide. They sent out, by the way, an email because it was in the same school district that my kids go in. They sent out an email with a list of people that they could talk to if the kids felt like they needed to. And they put on the list the coach, three different coaches, and the last person at the bottom was a school psychologist. First off, none of those people are trained in grief therapy. Maybe the school psychologist, but even then, and I'm not going to get into that right now, but to put the coaches in that position when they may not even have had that experience, and maybe the coach is going through his or their own grieving process, and that's how you communicated to the kids and to the faculty and to the families of, hey, this is where you can go if you're having a hard time. We're just going to assume that people are going to go, oh, I'm having a hard time. Let me go ahead and talk to my coach about it. That's not what happens. The organization has got to be able to get everybody together and have an open conversation about what happened and give people a space to be able to say what they need to say. This whole 3 days after you lose somebody, you get bereavement leave, which, by the way, is not a law in most states. Those 3 days, you haven't even figured out the details of anything yet within 3 days, and yet you're supposed to go back to work, and you're supposed to go back to work, and then you're going to use your vacation time if you're not. So you're not being provided the organizational support in order for the people in your organization to be able to do the job that you hired them to do. And this is a God's honest, true story. There are billions, not millions, billions of dollars lost in the United States by people who are in the workplace due to injury, due to poor productivity, due to poor inability or absences that are all due to a death that isn't being navigated correctly by the organization. So we've got billions of dollars that are being lost, and yet we continue to do the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. The organizations have got to be able to provide a structure to allow people to gradually return back to work. I know, trust me, I own 2 group practices. I don't want to see any of my employees out. It impacts me financially. But you know what's even more important? The person the person's more important to me. Their ability to do their job is going to be completely contingent upon their own mental health, their own ability to take care of the things in their lives. So having a structured approach to return back to work, in my opinion, is a more favorable way of approaching these problems, alongside of, you know, having open dialogue, and not just open dialogue for a day, to be able to come back to that and give the people that, like, so for example, if this is in a school, you should have an in-service with teachers on how to teach teachers and administration, especially administration, on how to help them deal with their own feelings should they lose a student, and then how they can help the students in their classrooms, and also how to recognize when things aren't going well. What are the risk factors of these students? So these are things that need to happen in these organizations. I did have a woman, Tara, ask, how do we grieve as professionals who have lost others? So in other words, if we are grieving ourselves, we are going through our own loss, how are we supposed to help other people who are also grieving? And this is tough, because this definitely has happened multiple times in my career, and I've definitely seen, you know, that with other, you know, professionals in my field. You have to give yourself some time. I know that we're here in order to try to help people with their grieving process. However, with that said, you cannot give from an empty cup. And there's this analogy that I think is really actually kind of cool. Imagine you've got a saucer and a teacup placed on a saucer. So what I'm talking about is a teacup and a saucer. For those of you, some of you might be too freaking young to even know what I'm talking about, but just imagine, here's a saucer, here's a teacup. And we talk about, you know, being able to give for ourselves, from ourselves to other people. And often what happens with those of us in the helping professions, we give out of our teacup. Well, what's in the teacup, how you fill your teacup back up, is with self-care and with honoring your own boundaries. And what we're looking for is not giving from our teacup until it's empty, because guess what? That's it. That is what's going to happen, especially if you're not filling your teacup back up. But if you're giving until it's empty, if you can overflow that teacup with self-care, with honoring your boundaries, with allowing yourself to grieve, then it overflows into the saucer, and instead of giving from your teacup, you give from your saucer. Self-care is never selfish. I have lost clients, and I have lost friends, and I have lost loved ones. And I know that almost every single person I work with, they're grieving something or somebody. I know that they're struggling. I want them to have a support system in place, but I might not be able to be there for them if I am in an acute place of grief. If I were to lose my spouse, there is no way I could come in here and help somebody that was also grieving their own loss. I need a little bit of time. So my responsibility is to make sure that I give them a referral to another person who might be able to step in a little bit for a while. I've never had a client that actually has chosen to do that, because they don't really have that rapport, but I provide it anyway. I make sure that they have as much resources as possible, or I have somebody step in to help me get those clients resources. And hopefully that client is surrounded and has enough coping skills at that point to be able to get the help that they need, so that I don't have to worry about that person falling apart while I'm over here falling apart myself. And then I'm going to use all of my coping skills. I'm going to use all of the resources that I have, and I'm going to give myself permission to gradually come back to work and honor my boundaries accordingly. If I'm finding that I'm not able to focus on working with the client that I have because I'm lost in my own thoughts and my own feelings, it's not time for me to come back yet. I might need a couple of days. I might have to cut my days short. I might have to think about seeing some clients every other week. I mean, I might have to get creative in the way that I do my job. And I'd love to say that I know that that's not easy for everybody. If you're working for organizations and you don't have that flexibility, we have got to learn how to start advocating for ourselves. And that's a huge part of being able to get our needs met when we are helpers that are grieving. There's a book. Oh my goodness. When Professionals Weep. Good book. How to help professionals who have experienced trauma, or even vicariously traumatized by people who are going through their own trauma, meaning I'm traumatized because I'm hearing your traumatic story. When Professionals Weep is a good book to help with that. Let's see here. I've got another one from Trish F saying, how do we help somebody who is struggling with ruminating about their guilt? That is a great question, because with guilt comes a lot of if-onlys, what-ifs, I shoulda, woulda, coulda, must have done this. And that's a natural part of the grieving process, the if-onlys. And it can eventually become a risk factor for prolonged grief. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is. But first things first, please know that it's a normal process. The thing is about rumination is that the rumination is like keeping something going along in your memory over and over and over and over again. It's like the working memory. So like if you told me to remember 3 colors, I would have to roll that, those 3, red, blue, green, red, blue, green, red, blue, green. But if you asked me red, blue, green, what those 3 colors were later on, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you, right? Rumination is keeping those thoughts in that working memory. They just keep going around and around and around. So they're not getting processed. They're just becoming part of they're becoming part of the current difficulty of being able to move forward in a person's life. So A, it's normal, but B, when it goes on too long, we're wondering about it. So when we're looking at guilt, we are looking at being able to find ways to forgive ourselves. There are 14 different types of guilt. I won't get into that right now, but a couple of those are like role guilt, like you failed at being able to protect your child, for example, being in the role of a parent, or survivor's guilt, feeling like you shouldn't have lived because other people that you cared about died. So helping with the rumination includes, well, what are you feeling guilty about? What story are you telling yourself? What did you do so wrong? Being able to lay that out and to verbalize that. And are you able to find a way to write it? Because one thing that happens with rumination is that the thoughts start getting confusing and they're not organized. But when you write, you have to organize your thoughts. So getting things out on paper about what are you guilty about? Why do you feel like you're guilty? Or what do you feel? How do you feel that this guilt is impacting you? How do you think this guilt is impacting other people? Starting to think about how the rumination is getting in the way of you being able to move forward in your life. What do you think is needed in order for you to relinquish your attachment to this guilt? How can you forgive yourself for this guilt? What would you tell your best friend? There's the best friend analogy. What would you tell your best friend? And how come you're not talking to yourself the way that you would talk to your best friend as well? So the rumination ends up hopefully under the light of empathy from other people, reduces the amount of regret that comes with rumination and guilt. Being able to say, yes, did it impact your life this way? Did it hurt the person this way? Is that the entire story? So you got to pull that guilt and that regret out of the story and realize that it doesn't define the entire story, that it's part of the story. Again, we go back to that hindsight bias. You can make a whole lot of assumptions now. It's placing today's understanding on yesterday's problems. And that you could be looking at that much differently now compared to what was happening then. And to remind yourself that you've done the best that you could with what you had at that time. Could you have done something differently now? Maybe, but that's because you have more knowledge. All right. Some questions about what not to say. Oh, this is one of my... If you watch the video on, or in the podcast, listen to the podcast on disenfranchised grief, I go into this quite a bit. But here's some ideas of things not to say. This drives me a little crazy, what happens. Because sometimes people say things and they're not doing it in a way to hurt a person. They're doing it because they don't know what else to say and they think it's going to be helpful. So first I want to say, when you start thinking about what not to say, remember it may not always be coming from a bad place. If it is coming from a place of being completely disrespectful, now you got to talk about assertive communication and how to not stab people in the neck with a spoon. So that would be a whole different thing. But see, some things not to say. She was such a good person that God wanted her to be with him. You can always have another child. I know exactly how you feel. I think I got a whole list of them. They all start getting all mixed up in my head. My goodness, I have a handout. If you guys are interested in it, contact me. I've got 2 handouts, what to say and what not to say. You always can get a new pet. That's another one that people say. I think I said that to you earlier today. Other things. She's in a better place. No, she's not. She's not in a better place. She should be here. At least she's no longer in pain. She's in a better place. She's not in pain any longer. She was such an angel that she was too good for this world. I mean, this is all shit that I hear people say. You hear people say this, and you're just kind of like, "What are you talking? My God." Things to say. How about? These are a lot of difficult emotions. Or my favorite memory of Joe. Let's say Joe passed. My favorite memory of Joe is, my door is always open. If you need, you can call me. I'm up early and I stay up late. Or don't say anything, just be with that person. If the person's comfortable with a hug, to just hug them. To be able to say, there's no good reason for this to happen. There was no good reason. You know, it's okay to not be okay. You know, saying things like, oh, you'll get through this. It just takes time. Those are things not to say. So there's a lot of, like I said, if you're interested in it, you know, go ahead and email me. You can email me at drz@centerforgrieftherapy.com, and I'm more than happy to give you the handouts that you can share with whoever you like. And the last thing, oh my goodness, we had a lot of questions. What's a success story? A success story that I've had many success stories. And one success story that I had, oh my goodness, where can I start? I have a lot of, I'm trying to do this. I have to change some things around in my mind so I can maintain the person's confidentiality. But I was working with an elderly woman who lost her husband, in which she was married for 63 years. I mean, they grew up together. Their entire life was built with one another. They were very involved with the church. They had a great support system. Their kids were really strong, and this happened during COVID. So she ends up becoming very socially isolated as a result. I mean, you know, they would get, she was elderly. She was 86 years old. So knowing technology was not her strong suit, but she had to learn how to do, you know, Zoom meetings. She had to learn how to get together with people like virtually in order to not be socially isolated. One of the things that was happening with her is that she wasn't taking care of eating, and because eating used to remind her of her husband. They used to spend a lot of time cooking together, and there were certain recipes. She wasn't looking at pictures of him. She was having a hard time asking for help. That was a big one. When you lose a spouse, if your spouse had taken on certain responsibilities, then you have to learn new skills. You have to take on new roles. These were things that she was hesitant about. So in working together, one of the many things happened. The first one was working towards getting her to be connected socially. So she was able to pick up on that pretty quickly because she felt very a strong desire to be connected to the people in her church. So that went well. Getting her to accept help, that was a little tougher. But being able to talk about, well, what kinds of things do make, are helpful for you versus what kinds of things can you do on your own? What do you need help with? And so we worked towards that. And when COVID was over and I was still working with her, I had asked her if she would like to bring in some, a picture of him to share with me. And she ends up showing up with an entire photo album, which was great. We spent the entire session just looking at pictures of her, and I learned so much about her life. And then she informed me that they have family albums for every single year of the life. I don't know where the hell you put them. I don't know. But she got, I have to remember, and I am reminding you too, that grief is not a mental health disorder. Grief is a natural process. It sucks. It feels bad. It's going to feel bad. So when we have, I'm not here to fix that person. I'm here to facilitate the grieving process. I'm not here to drag somebody through. I believe that you will have the natural ability to heal, but I'm here with you to walk next to you while I'm doing that, to facilitate that process. 10 to 15% of people get stuck. That's a whole nother set. I can't even go into all of that right now. But what made that process was important was that I walked next to her as I had faith that she was going to be able to heal. And she started taking on new roles. She resented it. She didn't want to have to start paying the bills in the house, but she knew she had no choice. So sometimes she would bring her bills in, and I would sit right next to her as she was writing the checks for her bills. And she took on those new roles. So eventually she got to a point where she fired me, which is exactly what you're looking for as a therapist. And I know it sounds weird, but I don't know who the hell takes on student loans with the idea that eventually you're supposed to get fired. I don't know if I thought that one out very well. But I get happy when I get fired, especially when I don't get happy when I get fired prematurely. Then I'm like, no. But, definitely was happy when she was saying, I wish I could just have you over for dinner. And, when they start thinking, when people start wanting to be your friend, because it's an intimate relationship in a lot of ways. And I wish I could come over to your house for dinner too. But when she was like, I think I'm doing okay. Everything was in order. It's not like the pain wasn't there. The pain was still there. She still had to deal with all the difficulties that she had, but she had the support system. She started eating again. She started gaining weight, thank goodness, because she had gotten down to a very low weight. But she started eating again. Her family started coming around more because COVID, and that was part of the problem, is that COVID was there and she couldn't spend as much time with her children as she wanted to. So they started coming around more, and that was a healing thing for her. And it was I miss working with that client. Oh my goodness. Well, we've been going about an hour. We've been going about an hour. Okay, I have more questions, but I'm going to hold those off for the next time that we have our question and answer period. But I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and continue to put those questions down. I promise you I'll look at them, I'll pull out ones. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe to the podcast. But thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you in a future podcast.
Thank you for listening to Phoenix Rising with Dr. Z. If you found this podcast helpful, please share it, subscribe, and leave a rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. We want to be a resource for anyone who is experiencing loss, and this is a simple way you can help us spread the word. Check out our show description. There you'll find a link to connect with me on social media, as well as helpful articles and resources.